our director ended up with a massive visor, almost like a welder's visor, because he wanted to be able to the actors to be able to see him, and because, you know, not being able to see mouth movements and sort of him sort of kind of, you know, yeah, or a little bit, it's, you know, I think people have struggled with that a bit, and I think the communication aspect of it is tricky.
Welcome everybody, my name is Kate Elliott and I'm Director of High End TV at Screen Skills. It's so brilliant to see so many of you here today. We are really privileged to be joined by Ian Hogan and Alex Jones. Ian is line producer on Pursuit of Love for Moon Age Pictures, and Alex Jones is MD at Red Planet Pictures, looking after Death in Paradise at the moment. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Ian and Alex. I guess the first question would be from me is, it'd be great to hear from you, Alex, about what your thoughts are on the background challenges from a high-end TV perspective of coming back into production. What is it that was kind of the thing that you needed to face and overcome? And for example, things around insurance, etc. What was the kind of challenge that you first faced when you thought, right, we're coming back?
I think probably to begin with, it was the sort of the same thing that everyone was going through, really, on how, you know, how the hell do you do this with sort of I think with social distancing was the first point at which I thought, you know, when we first went into lockdown, I think probably slightly naively, I thought, you know, we'll be in lockdown for a few weeks and then hopefully we'll get over the worst of this and we can get back to it. And I think, you know, it became quite quickly apparent that normal wasn't going to be back for quite some time, and I think at that point we started looking at what needed to change in order for us to be able to even consider restarting production. And I think that, you know, insurance for us was definitely the first thing. And I think it's probably worth pointing out now that actually I think both Ian and I, on our respective productions, Death in Paradise and Pursuit of Love, both pretty fortunate that actually our policies were in place ahead of the COVID outbreak. So what that's meant for us is, whilst there are sort of restrictions in there and around the whole sort of setup, we have a degree of protection that actually a lot of other productions won't, you know, people that didn't have their policies in place. So I think we were very fortunate in that regard at the beginning. And I think for the shows that sort of were at the very early prep and just sort of getting their policies into place when lockdown hit and the outbreak happened, I think that they have a slightly different set of challenges. And the sort of the government sort of £500 million fund, which I think people have been talking about a lot, there's still a lot to be established as to what that actually means. There is no guidance from government yet on that. So I think they said, look, they are establishing a pot and it will be there to help support shows getting back into production. But, you know, we don't have any real information on that at the moment. So there's a bit of a waiting game going on there. And that's something that PACT have been leading. So hopefully we will find out more. So I think there's probably quite a lot of productions that are waiting for the details on that, because I think there's a huge element of risk, I think, going back into production. I think it's just working out how you mitigate those risks and how you manage that. And obviously the first one being everyone's safety. And then the second one sort of being, well, how do you sort of shoot safely with all the various sort of guidance in place around social distancing and PPE and all the associated things to that. So, I mean, I was going to let Ian talk a little bit, because I think we're obviously in Guadeloupe, which is a territory of France in the Caribbean, and we've been quite fortunate there that there's almost a bit of a bubble just by going there, whereas Pursuit of Love is shooting in the UK and sort of has to contend with the issues that the UK has, which is possibly a bit more relevant for people.
Yeah, well, just to pick up, yeah, Alex is right. We were quite lucky in that we did have our insurance in place before lockdown began, but it still, I mean, it still took everybody by surprise, and we were all expecting to be, I think, initially to be back in production within a couple of weeks. When it became clear that that wasn't going to be the case, the challenge for us really was to figure out how we get measures and procedures in place to enable us to return safely and to still, from an insurance perspective, satisfy our insurers that we were doing everything we can to make sure that we're not going to enter an enforced lockdown through anybody testing positive. So I think we engaged a health and safety company, and we decided to employ a full-time health and safety advisor onto the show to help produce a protocols document, which took a good few weeks really of kind of going back and forth between us all to try and work out, to try and get the wording right, and to try and create a document that we could then send to all cast and all crew, to basically try and to kind of give them a reassurance that the production company is doing everything it can to create a safe environment for a return to work. So I think it's been quite a lengthy process, and I think we've been talking to lots of other producers and production companies, and everybody, I think, is finding their own slightly different version of or protocols. But I think we're now in week 6 of the shoot. We started shooting again on the 27th of July. I think we've been quite fortunate in that a lot of our locations are in the countryside. We've got some big kind of stately homes that we've been filming at, so we've got quite a lot of space really to implement some of the measures, like to implement, to kind of give ourselves a bit more space to allow kind of create space for kind of costume departments, makeup departments, kind of catering locations. So but I think it's I feel like now we're in a good place. In week 6 of the shoot, we've been incident free, and I think there's been there's certainly been a great desire from cast and crew to return to work. But
you're doing close contact cohorts as well, aren't you?
We are, yeah. We created what we call a director's cohort, which consists of all of the performers. So that's cast, that's kind of essays, that's stunt people, and then the on-set crew, or the kind of key crew, those are the people who are on set or interact with the cast when they are unprotected. So we have we kind of developed we've got a testing regime which involves the people in the director's cohort being tested twice weekly, and that has been slightly expanded to include a kind of wider base of crew who are then tested once weekly. But again, we've got an on-site testing lab. But all these things kind of come at a cost. But I think we eventually got to a place where I think I feel we're in a good place now, and I think people coming back to it. There was a real trepidation, really, before, or for the first couple of days when people return. But I think people soon, I think hopefully we've given them a confidence to kind of feel that we're doing all we can to enable them to return to work.
Do you think the testing has given people a lot of confidence? I
think the testing does, but I think there's also a side where what you don't want to create is a complacency for people who think we're being tested twice a week. We don't, it's fine if if kind of we don't observe social distancing, or we kind of go out. So it's a fine balance, really. I think you've got to kind of reinforce that.
Yeah.
The social distancing and PPE, wearing the masks, is still something that we have to adhere to.
I mean, our approach on... Sorry, Kay.
No, I was going to ask the same thing, about yourself, Alex. How have you kind of approached it?
On Death in Paradise, we test everyone before they fly, and that's something that's been required anyway for us to fly over there. and then we test people 7 days after arrival, and then we're testing at the beginning of each block as well. And actually there was a small spike on the island at one point, so we did another test there. And we're slightly different in that we haven't gone down the close contact cohort system, because in France, social distancing guidance is 1 meter, 1 meter plus. So we felt that actually we could produce a series adhering to social distancing, both on and off of set. And that probably decision was made more because of where we were as well, because we were in an area that had been sort of relatively sort of mildly affected by the virus. So I think that we don't really have a lot of intimacy in our show. We film outside a lot anyway, and even the locations that are sometimes inside are very open, and there just isn't really a lot of physical contact written into the show. So we had a lot of things that work to our advantage on that. So that's what, that's why we've gone down the social distancing route. So our testing regime isn't as extensive as what they've got. Ian has on Pursuit of Love.
I think the reason we found that difficult on this show is because we're adapting a novel, so I think the source material is already there. So we weren't in a position of being able to make script changes, or to adapt that. So because it is a love story and there is intimacy, we had to try and find a way around that, which kind of led us to the director's cohort and the kind of concept of the twice weekly testing.
And you've got signposted, you've got a lab on location, haven't you?
We've got a mobile lab, signposted doing our on-site testing, which has been great. The lab's with us every day of the week, and we probably put about, the most we can probably put about 70 people through a day maximum, but we kind of spread that out over 5 days. And our health and safety advisor devises a schedule basically for all of the cast and all of the crew, looking at the day-to-days, working out when they're in, and with the cast and all the performers, we test them 7 days before their first day on set, and they will get tested twice within that first week. And it's quite a puzzle, quite a jigsaw. And especially, we have had people coming in from France and people coming in from Spain. So we've also got to keep an eye out on the guidelines for travel as well. And I think we've had to tap into the high NTV exemption for the talent so that they don't have to quarantine for 14 days. So it is quite a puzzle really. And I think between our health and safety advisor and our second AD, and our coordinator, it's quite something to get your head around.
And I'd be really interested to know, because obviously lots of productions are talking about a COVID supervisor role or somebody adopting some of those practices. How have you kind of worked that through on your respective shoots? Have you got a specific person? Is there anything that you might do differently now you're kind of midway through that you think actually a better role would have been, or this has really worked well for us? It'd be really interesting to hear both of your perspectives.
Well, it's been. I think you're right, Kate. I think you when we kind of were looking for somebody to take up a COVID production manager or supervisor role, we were kind of stumbling around, going, well, what is this person going to do? What kind of experience do they need? And we kind of ended up with a person with locations. Our kind of whole COVID team really come from a locations background, but as I said, we also engaged the full-time health and safety advisor, and it's kind of become apparent over the course of the shoot that actually I think the knowledge, the non-industry knowledge that the health and safety, the expertise that the health and safety advisor gives us in terms of the COVID, the specialized kind of COVID kind of knowledge has been invaluable really. And I think the crew will look to that person for advice and for thoughts, whereas it feels to me like the COVID team they're taking up. It's still kind of quite it's more of a logistical process, and it's a kind of a lot of the things they're doing. I think possibly could be covered by a bigger locations department. And it might be, if we did it again, I would certainly push to employ someone with a kind of health and safety background, but maybe support them with more of a kind of coordinator, an office kind of coordinator role, like I said, to work out the schedule for when the cast are all tested, when the crew are tested, where they're flying in from, where you've got to transport them to, where we're kind of filming in the west of England, so where they're staying, we've got to go and get production protocols from any of the hotels that we're using. We'll go and visit them and kind of talk to the management to make sure that we're happy that that they're kind of up to living up to our expectations. So I think there's two sides to it. There's the kind of there's the kind of medical side and the medical kind of expertise, which I think is invaluable, and knowing about the kind of government guidelines. But then there is a logistical support side to it in terms of facilitating catering and setting up kind of crowd areas and setting up crew and equipment areas on site. So
I guess that's where every production's so different, really. And that's why, sort of we've gone down a slightly different route, because we have a COVID supervisor. I even got him a flory jacket with it on the back, which he was delighted about. But we've used that as a slightly more sort of kind of sergeant major on set, and someone that they come from an AD background, and they've worked sort of, and they have quite a lot of health and safety sort of training, and we kind of went down the route of there was slightly less logistics because our testing regime is not as extensive as sort of what Ian has. But we went for someone that could be on set and continually reminding people to wear masks and correcting people where they weren't social distancing, and sometimes helping the director come up with solutions to sort of how you can shoot something while still observing the social distancing and workarounds. And we had health and safety out at the very beginning for all our recce's, and in advance of that with our, to help us with our setup and everything. And then they stuck around for about a week, and in a way helped actually train up that sort of COVID supervisor in some of the sort of specifics, really. But that's worked relatively well for us. I think that what's interesting is people have been better than I thought they would be. I think once you get into the routine of wearing masks, people will do it.
I think you're right, Alex. I think it certainly took us a couple of weeks to get up to speed, and those first 2 weeks there was a real we really had to kind of remind people to wear their masks, keep their distance. But I think by the end of week 2, everybody was kind of behaving as we expected. And it's something that we talked about. I know we've talked about this. It's about the personal responsibility of each crew member and cast member. And I think everybody has to sign up to, has to accept that they that there is a high degree of personal responsibility that they have to take whenever when they join the production. And you can't expect the production companies to be kind of wholly responsible for the behavior.
I completely agree, and I think that's one of the biggest things that this has been really, really difficult across the board for everybody, and and that's from sort of the likes of us trying to remount these productions and find ways of getting them sort of back on the road, to all the freelancers that have had no work and therefore no income, and and I'd always hate the idea that anyone thinks that sort of some of the kind of responsibilities are that we are putting onto individuals is about us trying to sort of pass the buck, because it just isn't. I think that the thing with this virus is that if people don't act responsibly and don't sort of follow certain guidance, then they put the whole bubble or the whole production at risk. And that's why I think in many ways you need everyone to buy into that, because if production gets suspended, then we're all fucked, really.
I think you need those strong leaders on set, and we've been very fortunate in that our first AD he's been a real fierce advocate of the mask wearing and He's been very, very kind of militant in terms of who, who is allowed on set at which time. The director's cohort, we again, our director's cohort works on the principle of everybody who's on set when the camera is rolling will have been tested twice a week and is part of that director's cohort. If we have to turn a set around, or we have to kind of reset lights, it is a case of stepping the actors off set, and the crew who are testing once a week, or the standby crew, they will be allowed onto set. They'll have to wear a mask. They'll also have to put a visor on, and they can they'll be able to work on set, but then they kind of step off set before the cast are allowed back on. But it's having someone, the presence on set, I think. And again, the first AD and the AD team have been brilliant. Our COVID assistants, who again have been organising PPE and reminding people about the responsibilities, have been great as well. But I think it's just instilling the importance of these procedures and these responsibilities to the right people on set. And I think it kind of filters down from there. It has for us.
And it'd be interesting to hear, again, for somebody who was being employed at the onboarding stage, but then also, say, on the first day of production, what might they see as a different change in terms of how they're, when they arrive on set, how different might it be? What should they expect?
Well, initially, what you will get a copy of our production protocols, which includes a kind of which outlines the responsibilities that we expect you to kind of adhere by during the shoot, which is, because we kind of went back into production quite early, the protocols in our production pledge is quite strict in that, when we are shooting, the crew sign up to only going out once a day for exercise, only going out for essential supplies, a bit like the conditions that were imposed by the government at the height of lockdown. So people sign up to that before they start. They'll also be given a health declaration, which basically says that they don't have coronavirus, or people who they live with aren't currently suffering, or they don't have any condition which may leave. Or we ask them about any conditions which might make them more vulnerable. And this is all very kind of heavily kind of data protected. And if there is anyone who anything is flagged up, then we will go in and talk to them individually and risk assess individual situations. There will be there's a daily health declaration form which is sent out to everybody who will be attending set every day. You'll get that overnight. You have to fill in. It's really just a reminder of the guidelines. It's a tick box to say that you're not currently suffering any symptoms, or anyone you're living with isn't suffering symptoms. Assuming you answer all of those questions with a yes, you'll then get what's called a green pass on your phone, which will be a text or an email, which you then have to show at the gate to unit base. We have our COVID supervisor and security there. You show them your green pass. You'll get a temperature test. Assuming your temperature is okay, then you'll be allowed access to site. If you get a red flag, which we've had a couple of, because you've answered no to some of the questions, you'll get a call off either the health and safety advisor or one of the COVID team. And it's often a case. I think the majority of our no's have been finger slips at 4:30 in the morning when people have kind of just pressed the wrong button. But it's still, it does get flagged, and there's a process where you're told not to come to work until you've resubmitted your pass and it's green. So that's the procedure. That's something different, really, which we've incorporated. And it is, the first week we had a queue of cars at unit base from people who hadn't submitted the form because it's just, they forgot to do it. They didn't see it. It was in their junk. But again, now week 5, week 6, it's just second nature, really. The first thing you do when you get up, you tap your details into the form, you get your green pass, you get your temperature checked on arrival. And again, this is also something that we've had to do when we are prepping locations as well. We've had, it applies to people who are a construction team or the art department dressers. We'll have a COVID person on site with them. Where they're dressing or where they're striking, again, they have to do the same process. and temperature tests and the COVID, the health and safety daily declaration form for them to fill in before they can come to work.
And I think that's most productions will be doing sort of forms of that. We are as well. We're our sets are a bit different. We're not in contained locations on the island, so we make people fill out their health declaration at the beginning before they leave, and we've given everyone a digital thermometer. They take their own temperature before they're leaving. We do spot checks, but essentially they make that declaration, and I think masks is the biggest thing. I think that the wearing of PPE. I think what most people have found, I don't know whether you agree with this, Ian, is that you need to wear a mask when you can't observe social distancing, essentially. But often when you're on a set, and we all know what sets are like, people are moving around continually. So the idea of moving the mask up and down, up and down, up and down, you just tend to end up wearing the mask.
It's been quite it's developed from the first week when everyone kind of was wearing the blue surgical masks or the white kind of builders masks. It's become quite a, it's not who's got the best mask kind of, it's a face covering, but it's been, it's not, people have got used to it, and it's a face covering really, rather than, on site rather than on the set. It's the N93, it's the kind of medical grade standard mask, but kind of off site, people are wearing face coverings as well.
Yeah, it's a distinction between the two, isn't it? The face coverings, which just gives a sort of general protection to people around you, and then the sort of the PPE, and whether you double that up with masks as well, with costume and makeup. When they're
the visors are only worn by those people on set who aren't tested twice a week, or by costume and makeup departments when people are in the chair or they're doing fittings. So people aren't walking around. We've not got the production office, for example, but they're not visored. The ADs, on the truck, they're not visored. Security locations, most people just a mask is sufficient for them.
And I think there isn't an answer across the board. That's the thing, because, and I think that's also what's difficult, because I think sometimes people are looking for, what happens here? What happens here? What do we wear in this situation? And actually, it will depend from production to production. I don't think that's about people having different standards as such. I think it's just it's what works for some people, what works for certain productions. At the moment, I think I haven't been back for a few weeks, but our director ended up with a massive visor, almost like a welder's visor, because he wanted to be able to the actors to be able to see him, because not being able to see mouth movements and sort of him sort of kind of or a little bit it's I think people have struggled with that a bit, and I think the communication aspect of it is tricky. So on the cost, like Ian said, with costume and makeup, they tended to wear on the trucks when they're with the actors a mask and a visor. But when they're just jumping in to do quick checks, it might just be the visor, or it might just be the mask. And so there's systems that have evolved, and I think that will probably be kind of back to Kay's original question. What will people experience when they turn up on a sort of production post-COVID? I think it's mask, getting used to wearing that, which I think people are getting used to anyway in the wider world. I can tell you it's much more unpleasant when you're in the Caribbean and there's the humidity is grim. But again, people out there have got used to it, and you just do get used to it. And I think it's kind of taking responsibility for yourself as well, not falling into that place where you feel the production should be just sort of taking full responsibility for your health and safety. It's about sharing that, and I think people bring their own face coverings, masks. We provide masks to people. We're getting through quite a lot of it, but actually not as much as I thought we would. So I think it does just vary.
There's also a little bit of there's a little bit more guidance, I suppose, as to which areas of base or set you're now allowed to attend, because the cater. We have separate catering areas for our directors cohort, separate catering area for cast, separate for SA. You know, we've kind of created these different spaces in order to really to kind of protect those twice weekly, you know, the kind of directors cohort, the people who are in front of camera. And I think in the industry anyway, there's quite a natural tendency, I think, for departments to kind of, you know, to kind of stick with the people they work with anyway, you know. But it's not really a case of everyone just piles onto a dining bus anymore, because you know, I mean, I think you sit in such close proximity in them. There probably could be a breeding ground for a contagion diseases. But it's yeah, there's a little bit more direction, I think. And also in terms of where people sit on set, we've been using Q-Take, so we haven't got everyone huddled around the, you know, kind of one or two monitors. We've got people have brought iPads in, and they've got a Q-Take monitoring system, so they can sit outside of set, away from set, within their department, and they can monitor what's going on. And that's kind of been working quite successfully. We kind of create a local Wi-Fi network, and our DIT sends the pictures out to them, and that's working really well, actually.
Yeah, no, we've got the same actually. So Video Village is a lot more sort of spread out, I suppose, and we bought some iPads, but also people can log onto it with their phones and things, depending sort of what they need to see. And I think that, you know, personally, for Death in Paradise, we have found it's affected the schedule a lot less than we thought it would. It has slowed things down a bit. I'd say we're probably doing slightly less setups, but we are generally not too far off what we used to do. We've added, for us, we added 2 days per block to our shooting schedule, and that has been sufficient so far. Again, that's just our production. I know other productions have had more than that. I think, obviously, everything sort of expands a little bit. I think we've ended up with more people off of set. I think probably the set has stayed around the same sort of amount of people, but there's definitely more support stuff going on outside, just as everything's slightly scaled up a bit more. And from a budget point of view, I don't know about you, Ian, but you know, I think that, you know, it could be anywhere between sort of 10 and 25%. On a, you know, depending on us. I think we're at about 15% for Death in Paradise. Testing is quite a large part of that as well. Yeah,
testing and personnel, you know, additional personnel, in terms of, you know, we've expanded the costume and makeup teams to try and it seems to be working. Certainly with costume and makeup, we've added a couple of extra people to the teams. I think the thinking was that we, you know, what we didn't want to be doing was bringing different dailies in every other day, you know, and then worrying about not knowing where they'd been, whether they would, you know, whether they were positive. It's just trying to control it as much as we can, really. And I think we've kind of, you know, we had a couple of people and engaged them on an 8 weeks out of 12 basis on the premise that, you know, they would be exclusive to us, and they were happy to do that. You know, it was something that they were kind of happy to sign up for, and it kind of suits, and I'm sure it suits some people. But again, what that's meant is that, you know, those people they're more invested in the show. You know, they fall under the testing regime. You know, we know that they've signed up to our protocols, rather than run that risk of, you know, you're kind of getting a different list of dailies every other day, you know, and people have been on this show or that show, or they've been doing whatever else. So
I'd agree with that. Yeah, dailies is the biggest kind of risk in many ways. Dailies, walk-ons, but you can separate walk-ons a lot easier than separating dailies. And so I'd say that we've had points where we've expanded the team slightly to avoid having to bring in umpteen dailies, and sort of, because it's all about mitigating risk. I think that's the biggest thing. There is no sort of one answer to how you make your production COVID safe. I think you just look at every sort of aspect. I mean, that's what we did. We spent weeks doing it, going through, step by step how we film. I mean, we were, I'd say, a massive advantage because we were a returning drama series. We had a setup that we were adapting rather than starting from scratch. So that worked in our favour massively. But I think it's as kind of slightly as dull as kind of almost going through every aspect of the production and looking at the risks in that and how you mitigate that, and whether you deem it's acceptable, because there will always be risks. It's impossible to completely de-risk it. But I think it's about avoiding any positive tests and anyone bringing COVID onto the set. And then if they and if someone does test positive, that the people that they have interacted with have been kept to a minimum. So when you're kind of removing them and quarantining them, then you're not kind of removing a whole massive part of the crew on the basis that they have been social distancing with their colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a really good point to now kind of turn to the audience and take a few questions. There's been lots coming in, so I'm going to try and get through as many as I can. So one of the questions is regarding underlying health conditions. Ian, you talked about people filling a survey pre kind of each day, before they come on set. What would happen if somebody said they had an underlying health condition? Would they still be employable, I guess, under the current?
Well, they would, and we would look to implement whatever measures we needed to do to enable them to work, to kind of come and work safely. And the circumstances for different roles that vary. If you are, I think if your role is a role that is a performance like a role on set with the cast when unprotected, it might be a little trickier to implement some safety measures. There's certainly the social distancing safety measures for someone like that, rather than for someone who, works in the production office or maybe in the art department or in locations. I think you've got to treat each crew member on a case by case basis and go, okay, can this person work safely? Can this person social distance? Can this person perform their role through the wearing of PPE? Does this person need to interact with the cast? I think it's something, again, like I said, we've got to deal with these situations on a case by case basis, and absolutely, we'll make every effort we can to make sure that people.
I agree. We've not had that either. We've risk assessed people on a case by case basis. People with diabetes, some other underlying issues, things like that. And we've just created a personal risk assessments for each individual about what we need to do to mitigate their risk, and they have to sign up to that and be comfortable with that. But you hear these stories of no one's allowed, or no one that's got any underlying health issues is allowed to, no one over the age of 50 or 60, and it's not a case of that. It's just a case of looking, and if they are at increased risks, what you need to do to mitigate that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah.
And regarding hair and makeup and costume, I guess, to a degree too, in terms of the changing guidance, you just imagine that those are the particularly impacted departments just because of their close-up work. Has that, and it sounds like you've mitigated that in terms of mask wearing, but has there been anything else that's needed to change in terms of those departments?
Well, yes, I mean, sure. With we've had to costume, for example, with their costume fittings, with our crowd, it's not a case of simply getting a rail of costumes from the costume house, bringing the crowd in, trying the costumes on. If it doesn't fit them, we'll try it on the next one. If it doesn't fit them, each costume, once it can only be tried on one person, then it's taken off, it's put back on the rail, it's then sanitized. So the process takes a lot longer. And also, there is an element of social distancing as well that has to go on with the interaction between the crowd or the cast member and the costume team. So certainly the costume, I think there's a lot more thinking ahead that needs to be done in terms of getting measurements for the cast and
online fittings and things like that, and there's been quite a lot of that. I'd say the costume designers, when they're buying stuff, are kind of having to buy more so they can return it. And I think with makeup, we've had
we're
more
giving
makeup.
more space. We've actually got two. We ended up with two principal makeup trucks just because they're 6-position trucks, but we've blocked the position out. So we're only using 3 positions on each truck, which obviously there's quite a big financial implication for doing that. So but again, it's something I do think it's got to be looked at case by case, and whether if everybody's in a testing regime, if everybody's wearing PPE, there may be a way to mitigate around that, but certainly that's where we started, and just in terms of giving people space to allow them to socially distance, but the costs are quite considerable.
And in terms of, would you have kind of a plan in place that if somebody does test positive, significant member of the cast or, the director, what is your kind of plan B, I guess?
Well, from our point of view, if someone tests positive, then, we take them off a set. We had an inconclusive result at one point, and we just kind of plucked that person out. And then we ultimately retested them and everything, and they were fine. But I think that's why the sort of social distancing off of set is so important, and outside of those close contact cohorts, if they exist, the social distancing is important, and that goes for the same between within departments as well, because what you should, in my mind, really be able to do, if one person was to test positive, you should be able to take that person out, and if they have observed social distancing and sort of hand sanitizing, all those sorts of things, and mask wearing, then the chance of that spreading would be far less, and that that's the best that you can kind of do, really. What you're not going to do is stop your entire production on the basis of one person testing positive.
I think it's a case of establishing who they've been in close contact with, and then assuming that if their test does come back positive, then the next step is to then test the people who have been within close contact of that person, and to get to try and make sure that it hasn't spread any further is to test them. And you would hope that it's just one positive, and then they would then be sent home, told to self-isolate, retested, and then when they eventually produce a negative result, they'd be allowed back to work.
And in terms of obviously everything that you've learned so far now on obviously the productions that you've got, the things that are coming down the line for you in terms of future productions or things that you might be advising on, is there anything specific that you think that's definitely something that we would just do differently? We've kind of learned through this that's either not needed or we should do more of X. Alex, what's your thoughts?
I think, to be fair, I have, I've been pleased with how everybody's reacted to this. I think people have taken to it a lot better than I was concerned they would. I think, I'd say the hardest thing and the most uncomfortable thing as producers is that you are having to get involved in people's personal life by the compromises that you're sort of asking them to make in their personal life at home, and avoiding, what you don't want is someone that's being regularly tested going to a massive rave and a big party, and then so you are having to kind of have those conversations and ask people to pledge not to do those things. And that's not very nice, really. I don't think any of us want to do that. But I think that the intervention that's happened, by the government or whoever in the way we live our lives has been sort of so extensive that actually people are probably slightly more used to it. But what I'd say is that, you have to, if you're going to enter a production, you have to sort of accept that you need to help protect that production when you go back to work. Because the risks are real, and very much sort of, a production having to stop, I'd say if you tested a large number of people, if you had I mean, we haven't set a specific limit, but if you had sort of 3 or 4 or 5 people coming back positive, then you probably would have to stand out.
Mm-hmm.
And Ian, what's your kind of takeaway in terms of things you might do differently, or that you really think are the key things?
Again, I think similarly to Alex, I've been really, really pleased with the way people have adapted, and they've shown there's been an enormous desire from everybody to return to work, and with that they kind of bring, I would say the majority of people are bringing with them a responsibility to kind of create this safe environment. In terms of things I'd change, I think maybe some of the procedures in terms of the COVID, the COVID department, which was didn't exist in kind of March when we went into lockdown. That needs fine tuning, I think, and I think it'll be interesting for me to hear how different shows, because I know different people have got coordinators, we've had ADs, we've had location managers, we've had production managers, so many different roles really. Suddenly people suddenly taking on this kind of this title of a COVID supervisor or PM, and it'd be interesting to see how, to try and find the most efficient way, I think, of making that department work, because there's a lot of crossover, like I say, between locations, between ADs, between production, between the kind of health and safety, the kind of the kind of medical knowledge that I think is kind of invaluable. So it'll be interesting really to have it to kind of at the end to sit back and go, okay, how can we fine tune this? Because I think what we don't want COVID to be is an excuse for people to spend money unnecessarily and to kind of to suddenly flood productions with requests for this, that, and the other. I think it's one of the things for me is you've got to kind of weigh up the kind of benefits of these different requests and these different roles and these different things that are suddenly being asked for because of COVID, and you've got to kind of try and judge what you do and don't need. So that's been a real learning curve, and I think, like I said, at the end of the show, I think it would be good to talk to other productions and to share how I feel it's gone on this, and to see how we can fine tune it, and what how we'd set that up again in the future.
And I think what I think is sort of unprecedented in the way in which we've got to where we are now is the collaboration between production companies, and it has been just massive. And we were sort of having weekly calls with about sort of 70 odd production companies, of people talking about who's at where, and then we sort of developed a slightly smaller working group, and we've been sharing all that knowledge. We've been feeding into PACT, into the BFC, to make sure that sort of that our level of production is sort of considered and represented in that. And I think that we are all still learning from each other, and shows like ours got back into production quite early, on a large part because of our insurance, and I think the advantage that the other productions that are going to have as they start to remount and start to go into production in the autumn is that they can learn from what we've established and what we've been through. And I think it will all become a lot less scary than it sort of has felt in the earlier stages. And and I think that so far we haven't had a positive case. We haven't had to stop filming. We haven't had to enact any kind of force majeure again. But of course, there's a risk that will happen, and then there's a risk of local lockdowns. And and if you're filming a show in Manchester and Manchester goes into a local lockdown, then that is going to have implications. And I think what I'd say is production companies have worked really, really, really hard to try and get productions back on up and running, and and that's largely meant sharing sort of the risk, financially in particular, with maybe broadcasters and other financiers, but the cost is and the risk is real, and what I'd say is crew are going to be signing force majeure provisions that have always existed in contracts but have never really been used very often, and now suddenly everyone's attention is drawn to them because they have been used, and I think when we went into lockdown, force majeure was something that was used, and it does mean that potentially your engagement can be suspended for up to 3 weeks, no pay, and then you basically either have to come back to work, you restart filming, or you're given a week's notice, and that's not really comfortable for most people, but it is unfortunately a reality of where we're at the moment, and so I think people probably getting their head around that is another thing. And it's not because production companies are being tight, it's because if they were to sort of pay beyond that it would probably mean that the production wouldn't restart, because there's only so much risk that you can take.
And I think, Alex, just to add to that, I think, on the ground, having started production again, I think pretty much everybody accepts that what you said is the case, and I think that they accept that there's a wider thing going on here, and understands that the reasons for for this, and if it does happen, it might happen, it will happen. It will be nothing that the production companies have done to make it happen. So I think, like I say, it's that there's a huge desire from everybody, I feel, to get back to work, and and there's a real understanding that it is a slightly different world, and there's different conditions that we're operating under. But I think it feels to me that there's also an acceptance that look, this might happen again, and I think if it does, I certainly feel that I'll be more prepared. I think the industry will be much better prepared, to deal with it quickly and react, and again try and find ways to kind of get up and running again.
Great.
And I don't think crews will shrink as well, because I'm just seeing a few of those comments.
Yeah.
I know, everyone talks about, of course there are some of the soaps that have gone back, and they've kind of gone back in limited ways, and but I think ultimately, we're not going to end up in a situation where crew sizes are being reduced. We're not going to end up in a situation where there's no trainees or nothing, because our industry is booming, and it's going to continue to boom as we come out of this crisis, and we're going to need those new people and need those new roles. And we, for one, haven't cut any of those trainee roles. Maybe sometimes we have to think about them differently, because you need to make sure they're part of the key crew and part of testing regimes and things like that. But I definitely think that we're not going to be in a situation where people aren't going to have opportunities to step up, move up.
Great. I think that's a really great place to end, and with 1 minute to spare. So I think I think one thing, just from my perspective, that I think the pandemic has proven that content is king. People have never been watching so much stuff than ever before, and I think that's a huge testament to the future of high-end television, and in fact all kinds of content, that we are still in that boom and it's not going anywhere. So obviously, with the caveats that Ian and Alex have shared in terms of some changes that you may expect to see on your return to production, we will be returning and returning in hopefully in the same strength as we were at absolutely pre-pandemic. So it's a positive story. So I can only really end by huge thank you, of course, to Alex and Ian for today, and to sharing their time and wisdom. Hopefully we've got through most people's questions, but brilliant to have you all here today. And as I've said, there are more sessions in this series of filming in COVID, so please do check out Screen Skills website. We've also got loads of other resources there, loads of other training and bursaries, help for individuals to help you move your careers on and up. So please do engage with us. But finally, thanks again to Alex and Ian today. So thanks so much, and see you all again, I hope. Thanks.
Cheers,
Bye.
guys. Take care. See you later.